The H1B Guy here, and today we're starting a new series called The H1B Guy Unfiltered. This will be an opportunity for me to talk more about current ongoing issues with U.S. immigration benefits, personal stories from immigrant workers in and outside of the U.S., and a recruiter rant about problems in staffing. So we're going to start today with U.S. furloughs postponed temporarily. In an article that was written on July 24th of 2020 for the St. Alban Messenger by Michael Frett titled, quote, Leahy USCIS furloughs postponed another month. I'm going to cover the first couple of paragraphs just so that you're aware of what the most recent news is here on this. Quote, scheduled furloughs for 13,000 members of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, staff have been delayed another two pay periods, according to the office of Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont. According to an announcement today from Leahy spokesperson David Carl, Leahy has received assurances from Acting Director of USCIS that furloughs will be delayed by two pay periods until August 31st, and that hopefully they will not be needed at all if Congress and the President enact a COVID emergency appropriations bill for the next fiscal year that addresses USCIS's budget shortfall. After initially reporting a deficit and announcing it would furlough about two-thirds of its staff, USCIS was recently revealed to actually be facing a budget surplus going into the final months of the current fiscal year, meaning the agency would likely be able to cover costs through September. I'll tell you, it really just feels like the U.S. immigration system as a whole and the acting body that governs it, USCIS, is teetering on the brink of a disaster here. The thing that's really baffling on all this, though, is how USCIS now miraculously is going to finish the fiscal year of 2020 with a budget surplus. If we go back to May, we remember that's when they requested the $1.2 billion bailout from Congress because they were going to have a deficit. Really, really interesting. And, what I think's the most interesting about this is that really there aren't enough people that are aware of the impact of something like this and the magnitude it's going to have on our economy into the foreseeable future. The literal crumbling of the governing body that oversees immigration benefits to every individual who enters and exits into the U.S. That's what we're facing if there is, in fact, a 13,000 plus employee furlough at USCIS. Now I want to talk about two recent not so unique stories. Two individuals that I've had the opportunity to interact with over the last week. So at the beginning of last week, I was connected to an individual that we'll refer to here as VB. VB is currently working in India and has an approved H1B valid until January of 2022. VB's problems start with the fact that VB's current petitioner doesn't have an end client for VB, even though the H1B has already been approved. The position was with the end client was lost due to COVID-19. The second problem for VB is that VB owes his current employer in India 60-day notice of separation. This is actually very common in India and acknowledged during the employment agreement. I've even come across some Indian employment agreements that are actually 90 days notice. What happens if the employee breaks the agreement is that they have to pay out a buyout fee that's stated in the employment agreement or return some percentage of their pay. Can you imagine a system like this in the US? So why are both of these problems creating issues for VB? Well, the first issue is that VB requires a visa stamp. Even though VB has an approved H1B visa, he cannot enter until VB's passport has been stamped through consular processing. Without in-client evidence to support the employer's evidence, VB will most likely receive a 221G and will be unable to provide further documentation from the end client because the position was lost. The second issue is that very few US-based companies will wait 90 to 180 days before VB would even be allowed to enter into the US and have authorization to begin work. So this kind of goes back to the who moved my cheese, right? VB's problem is not unique. VB has an approved H1B, but VB doesn't have an end client. VB previously had an end client, but the end client lost the position due to COVID and funding. So what's VB's solution? Well, ultimately, unless VB can find an employer here in the US that's willing to wait 6 months, most likely, before VB can enter and go through consular processing, VB is going to be in India with an approved H1B that's not being utilized. Late last week, I was also connected to an individual we'll refer to here as PR. PR returned to India in February and had a consulate appointment for stamping on March 10th in Chennai. The Chennai consulate is notorious for issuing a 221G administrative processing, which typically requires further supporting evidence to be produced. PR has been working under subcontractor arrangement. The relationship that exists is PR, the employer, a vendor, and the end client, all of which must provide evidence of the employee-employer relationship. The end client responded to the 221G request with the appropriate evidence on March 15th. Yes, March 15th, as in the day all U.S. consulates closed due to COVID-19. Until the 221G is approved, or PR is able to change employers and receive approval and return for consular processing, he'll continue to be separated from his family. He has a wife and 2 kids that are here in the US. Here's someone with a priority date of June 2014, has an approved I-140, and yet is unable to enter the US and is separated from his family due to the pandemic. Can you imagine that? And think about it. The foundation for which US immigration was laid was family based. And we are separating PR from his family. So now I want to get to what I'm really excited about this week. And this is a rant from a recruiter. And today we're going to talk about third-party vendors. First off, I've worked with a lot of third-party vendors during my time as an agency recruiter and made a lot of placements together with them. I've worked with some really good account managers that learned and adapted as the needs with my book of business changed. But I've also worked with some offshore-based account managers that could barely communicate with me and were more about the transaction than actually building a relationship. So here's the deal. I'm going to fill you in on a dirty little secret. Most agency recruiters and account executives hate working with third-party vendors and third-party candidates. There, I said it. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news if this comes as a big surprise to you, but it's the truth. Why, you may be asking? Well, there is a long list of reasons why, but most go back to horrible resumes that are 10 pages long, terrible communication, both verbal and written, lies, deception, fraud, fake resumes, bait and switch tactics, the constant haggling over pay rates from the submission of the candidate through the entire length of the engagement, just to name a few. Any recruiters out there ever agree to submit a third-party candidate and have the vendor literally follow up with them every hour asking, was the candidate submitted? When is the interview going to be scheduled? Was the candidate submitted to the client? When is the client going to schedule the interview? And the cycle continues over and over and over. It's exhausting. So why have I had the success that I've had in my career working with third-party vendors? Well, I think it goes back to the reason that I've had the success is that I fully understand that only certain roles, developers, engineers, architects, are going to be filled with placing a third-party consultant. End of discussion. So, over my career, I've worked hard to build a list of trusted partners in a variety of niche skill sets. Not all third-party vendors are created equal. They all have different networks, access to different candidate pipelines based on geographic areas, both domestically and globally. Because of that trust that I've learned to develop, when they hear from me on a job order, they know it's real. I set an honest expectation of the quality of candidate that I expect to receive from them. This typically results in profiles of high quality and allows me to move through the recruiting process at a much quicker pace. Time kills all deals in staffing. If you're an agency recruiter, don't be afraid of working with third party vendors to help you source candidates. But understand you're in control. You've got to give them updates as you receive them. You have to provide detailed feedback when their consultant misses the mark in an interview. Also, don't be afraid to fire the bad ones. I know I have, and they fired me. It happens. If you're a third party account manager, some advice. Don't be annoying. Don't submit above the rate when we send you that number, because that's the number we need, right? Don't call recruiters or email them every hour looking for an update. We'll let you know when something happens. Okay? So, listen, third party subcontractors, that candidate pool is vital and necessary to the success of placing highly skilled tech workers in some of the large enterprise organizations that we see in the US. So, there is a possibility that we may be losing out on opportunities if recruiters aren't working with subcontractor and third party candidates. But understand those third party vendors out there, you've got to back off and let recruiters do what they do, which is get your candidate in front of their client. As always, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video and this content today. Round one of the H1B Guy Unfiltered. Um, if you would, check out the full post on the h1bguy.com. As always, please like and subscribe to this video. Click the bell for notifications. The H1B Guy, your global source for all things H1B.